certainly have fears that there is a serial killer at loose in Perth.
Sarah Spears, Jane Rimmer, Kira Glennon.
And every time you saw a young girl walking by, you think, oh God, is she going to be the next victim?
Now, one man stands accused.
If police are right and Edwards is the Claremont serial killer, he's been hiding in plain sight for 20 years.
The link between Kira, Jane and the Karrakatta victim was found by a fibre match thanks to a pair of Telstra trousers. Natalie Bonjolo, Tim Clark and Alison Fan with you for day 74 of Claremont in Conversation. Well, Tim and Ali, the discovery of these pants, which we've discussed in previous podcasts, and of course this was the reason why the trial was delayed for 4 months. Well, today you heard about how the fibres were compared.
Yeah, that's right, Nat. You might be forgiven for thinking this evidence is a little bit similar to yesterday and the day before, and you'd be absolutely right in that assumption because it was very similar. But yesterday we dealt with the fibres that were predominantly found on Jane's hair, and they were predominantly grey in colour and predominantly said to match Mr. Edwards' car. Today we moved on to Kira's hair, and the significant amount of fibres that were found in her hair mass, and we began going through those today. And a large proportion of those, as you said, Nat, are blue, and they're the blue polyester fibres that the prosecution say match up exactly with the type of trousers and shorts that Mr. Edwards would have been wearing back in the day as part of his work uniform for Telstra. And so that was what we started with today. And then all the other comparisons that were done with those fibres that were discovered in terms of trying to cross-match them, certainly with the Telstra pants, certainly at times with the blue fibre that was found in Jane's hair. And we know from previous evidence that there were also matches done on some of these fibres to the fibres that were found on the shorts of the Karrakatta victim. There are a significant amount of critical fibres in Kira, over 60. So we'll be hearing a lot more about that next week. We dipped our toe into that. I think we got through about 8 of those fibres today. But what really, again, stuck out to me today was how close in time to the trial this investigation and this particular part of the investigation was running, because the main bulk of the fibres, the blue fibres that were found in Kira's hair, were only discovered in 2018. They were only actually pinpointed, put on the slides and put under the microscope in 2018. That's almost 2 years after Mr. Edwards was arrested. And then these comparisons with the other fibres were still going on in May last year, in 2019, which was only months before the trial was due to start. So again, it just reiterates how long and how far and how close up to the trial these investigations were actually going on.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the timeline is actually extraordinary. And of course, the 2019 comparison is because of those Telstra trousers that were handed to police and used as a match that you've told us about in previous podcasts. It has been very interesting, hasn't it, Ali, to just see how tight this timeline was and understand why this trial was forced to be pushed back for 4 months.
Absolutely. I mean, you're looking at May 2019 when they're talking about vacuuming the floor of the car, and that was literally just weeks before the trial was originally due to start. But what I'm finding a little bit confronting about this evidence that's coming out all the time is that I just know, Tim, science speak, they use words like corresponding and similar. But as a TV reporter, I'm sort of a bit worried about interpreting that as, is that a definitive match when they say similar and corresponding? I just, as I'm finding that to try to cover this as a TV reporter, very, very difficult in the scientific language that's being presented, and whether whether I am misinterpreting that by trying to put it in mums and dads' language is what I'm saying as a TV reporter.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Ali, because as Brendan Chapman has spoken to us about this as well, and he was also very concerned about using the word match, and he said he wouldn't use that word. It's corresponding fibres. So he was saying while the fibres correspond, to say that this fibre is an exact match to this fibre isn't how they would phrase it in a scientific sense.
No, and if you were a jury listening to this as we are listening to it, with no one explaining it definitively, you just wonder, thank goodness it's a judge trying to interpret this, because as I know in the scientific world, they never use definitive things. They never say never, and this type of thing, I'm finding it almost impossible to cover as a TV reporter and get it into some sort of a short news report, especially with what else is going on around the world. But, is there an end in sight to this, Tim?
Well, there is, but it's a bit further along on the horizon than we'd anticipated. I think Ms. Barbara Gallo was a little bit ambitious in her timeline that she laid out a couple of weeks ago. As we mentioned.
Yes.
Yeah, well, as we mentioned, there's 98 critical fibres. We got up to number 32 today. So if you average that out at around about maybe 15 fibres a day, we've still got a few days to go yet. And as we've said to the listeners before, it's not exactly the most dramatic or sexy day in court, but it is extremely important for the prosecution case. This is their last big hurrah, I suppose.
Well, they don't call this a trial of the century for nothing. I've never seen anything like this in 50 years or more of court reporting. I mean, a broadsheet, yes, you see it on a financial case like perhaps the Bell Group, which goes on for decades, but I'm used to looking at a policeman pointing to a mud map saying the victim's body was here and the accused bloodied footprints were over here by the front door and the knife was found here, and that's it. But this, we're getting sort of like endless, amazingly methodical minutiae, aren't we, as far as the detailing of fibre by fibre, and it is quite mind-numbing for someone trying to cover it. As I said, thank goodness there's not a jury. Yeah, there
were times this week, Ali, when I thought the trial of the century was actually referring to how long it's lasting rather than its significance. But there we go. I bumped into Miss Barbara Gallo outside court. She did tell me that she did warn me and warn us that it might be a little bit tedious for us, but as she's pointed out so many times in and out of court, it is a big plank, a vital plank of their case, and they're not going to rush through it just for the sake of trying to knock a couple of days off at the end.
Yeah.
No, I just find it amazing that they've carried on the way they have, considering all the restrictions are put on it. They're getting tighter and tighter as far as covering it. I notice now that as far as the media goes, we're tied in working from home, but covering it electronically, it's still difficult not being actually in the courtroom sometimes.
And Tim, you mentioned that there have been days where you're the only person in the courtroom.
Yeah, no, there's a hard core of us left covering every day, but I suppose most significantly the families of the Glennons and the Rimmers and the Spears, certainly Dennis and Jane's nearest and dearest haven't been in court basically since Christmas or certainly soon after Christmas.
Obviously, COVID-19 is a moving feast, and we've just heard from the Premier of Western Australia, Mark McGowan, who has said that they will be opening schools on the 29th of April. So at the end of school holidays, schools will go back. If schools go back, then perhaps other restrictions ease up, and who knows where we'll be in a few weeks' time with that anyway.
Well, having said that too, there's been another restriction I noticed just came down today or yesterday to do with the one hearing room that's the live link into this Claremont trial downstairs. It's now been limited to 7 people in there. Now, there's other journalists in there that are covering other trials and hearings that are going on. So to sit down there and do our social distancing is going to be very, very difficult. While other things might be restricted, these are still being carried out as far as the links go.
Yeah, it changes daily.
Yeah, so our bunker on the first floor of the District Court building in Perth is limited to 5 of us. So and we are trying to spread out as much as we can, or keep our distance from each other as much as we can. But yeah, I mean, it's just added another whole element of uniqueness to what was already a unique trial.
Tim, you had up a DNA spreadsheet in that bunker there that everybody could refer to. Have you got a fibre spreadsheet up?
Yes, we have. My scroll is on the wall. I'm looking at it right now, actually. And that was done a few months ago, based on what Miss Barbara Gallo had said in her opening, which is as Ali mentioned, a mud map. But I could probably take up all the walls and most of the ceiling if I tried to write all the detail that we'd heard in the last few days. And as I explained yesterday, we're just going through each fibre, describing where it's come from, how it was found, who it was found by, when it was found, and then all the comparisons that were done. And so we got onto Kira today, or Kira's hair today, and for the first time we actually found out the detail that had gone on in that examination in 2018. The regular listeners might remember that we talked about how Jane's hair mass had been divided into portions to make it easier to analyse for the analysts at the Chem Centre and Path West, and that had been split into 5 areas. Today we heard that when they actually got Kira's hair mass out of storage, cold storage, and really got down to the very detailed work that they did on that. And this is in 2018, as I just mentioned. They actually divided Kira's hair into 16 different samples, and then went through each of those. And that analysis in total spanned over 24 days for one mass of hair, and 17 working days that it was analysed. So once again, it just goes to show the absolute detail and thoroughness of what was being carried out, almost 2 years after Mr. Edwards had been arrested and charged with Kira's murder.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. So from that examination, they gathered 50 of these critical fibres. Now, one of the fibres that we spoke about yesterday was the fibre that corresponded to the boot of Edwards' car. Was there any more on that today?
Yeah, there was actually, and it was interesting in that there was so many comparisons done on that one fibre, because it was a pretty rare fibre in terms of, if you look just in the main hair mass, there was 25 of these blue fibres, but this one was particularly of interest because it appeared to have come from another part of the car. And so when they did the comparisons, they compared it to 7 different fibres taken from different areas of the boot of the car, just to obviously absolutely make sure and give themselves some certainty that it had come from that car, and where Mr. Powell, Reece Powell, did say there were slight differences. The overall assumption was that it was from the boot. Because they had done so many different matches and had satisfied themselves that is actually that was the source that is alleged.
Was there any fibres today that were tested and didn't correspond that were of note?
There were some that that Mr. Powell couldn't go as far as saying corresponded, which is as high as he will go. But there were a couple that he could only say that were similar, that they didn't tick all the boxes, as we discussed earlier in the week. There was also a little outlier in that the boot fibre that we were talking about, the last fibre that related to Jane, they actually tested that against another car, another model of car altogether, which is the Toyota. They managed to track down a Toyota Lexen car, which was the same model and make of car, but it was rebadged, and so they went as far as doing that as well, to see if that was a match, again, it was the same trim number, the same colour and style of the interior, and again that was said to be a very close correlation. So not only were they going for the exact make of car, not only were they going for Mr. Edwards' actual car, they were going for different cars of a similar breed, just to really be able to tick all the boxes.
So this was really a secondary way of confirming the corresponding to this particular type of car.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. Once again, just another stone that they didn't want to leave unturned.
Yeah. Well, we have a couple of questions from you that we will ask to Tim and Ali now. So I've got from Michael, what I'd like to know from Tim is what sort of interaction does Ms. Barbagallo have with the accused in the courtroom? By that I mean, when Ms. Barbagallo is reading out a statement or questioning one of the state's witnesses, does she ever turn and look at the accused when certain vital aspects of evidence is mentioned in the court, or is this the sort of action only done in jury hearings on TV dramas?
No, the latter. It's very rare that Ms. Barbagallo addresses anyone in the court other than the witness that she's questioning, the judge, because that is obviously where all the evidence is being directed, or there will be the occasional interaction during proceedings with Mr. Jovich or Ms. Cleary, who are the co-counsel for Mr. Edwards. So there is very little, even non-verbal communication between Ms. Barbagallo and Mr. Edwards. I mean, Mr. Edwards, obviously, as we mentioned, is taking very close interest in what is going on, still writing his notes. But his only real interaction with persons in the court that I've witnessed has been with his lawyers, and then the occasional smile towards his parents when they were attending court. But there's been no pointing across the courtroom and direct accusations flying. Unfortunately, that would have provided a bit of colour this week if there had been. But no,
it doesn't happen, does it? No, I think she would have been brought up quite sharply by the judge if she started whizzing around pointing to the accused.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Ali, we have a question from Michelle who asks, has anyone tried to explain how Mr. Edwards could have driven the girls so far to the supposed kill sites, i.e. is the supposition that they were subdued, unconscious after entering the car?
Look, I puzzled over this myself because especially with Kira, when she got in the car at Claremont, and she would have expected only to get driven a matter of a couple of kilometres at the most towards her home, that if he would have veered off to the direction where she was found, you would have been kicking and screaming. So you just have to think that they must have been subdued very early, because all of a sudden you're driving along the coast towards Eglinton, which is miles and miles away from Claremont. The minute he turned off, you would have been opening the door or fighting or to get out. So you just have to. This has really bothered me right from the start as to why they didn't fight to get out. He must have subdued them, whoever it was, for them not to have fought to get out of the car.
Well, you're not alone there, Ali, because this is a question that many of you who are listening to this podcast have asked us in your emails to us. But I guess the reality is, Tim, that this hasn't been explained in court.
Well, no, Nat, because there's no direct evidence that really points to it. And as we've said all along, the reporter's job is to report what is said in court. And obviously, this case, there has been so much supposition and so many theories along the way that you do. It's only natural, as Ali's just said. You try and fill in the blanks. You try and come up with scenarios yourself to how could this have happened. And the direct evidence that we've heard is that when they did find Mr. Edwards' car in 2016, they went over it with a fine-tooth comb, looking for any evidence that would point to that. They didn't find any blood. They didn't find any hair. They didn't find any signs of a struggle, even though it was obviously 20 years on. We've had other questions to the podcast about when Mr. Edwards was seen in the days after both murders, whether he showed any signs of any injury on his person. All we can say is there's no evidence to point towards that. When we discussed the Telstra evidence all those months ago, and we supposed about that Telstra must have known about Mr. Edwards' offending at Hollywood Hospital in 1990. All we can say is that there were Telstra witnesses brought to the stand, and they couldn't produce any documents that showed that they could. So they did know. So, as I say, we try and fill in the blanks, but as reporters, we've got to be very careful because we are bound to report what is said in court and not maybe sometimes what's in our heads.
No, that's right. It's just that the area itself was so tight to where the victims were supposedly going. We talk about Stirling Highway, which is the main highway. Any veering off of that you'd sort of worry about, and this is just as you imagine what would happen, but we just don't know.
No, that's right. It's one of the great unanswered questions, along with many other unanswered questions that, we've been asking through the course of this trial. So the Chem Centre expert, Rhys Powell, he'll be back on the stand next week, probably maybe even for the remainder of the week. What's expected after that, Tim?
After that, Nat, I dread to think. No, after that, we think we're going to get to... Well, look, there's two possible forks we can go down. Peter Collins, who is Mr. Powell's boss, ostensibly at Chem Centre, and we heard today he was one of the analysts that found many of these fibres during his exacting work over all those years. He might be called as a witness. If he isn't, then we believe that the next witness then will be the fibre expert who's written the report that brings all this evidence together, if you like, Dr. Ray Palmer. He is based in the UK. He's one of I think it's safe to say, one of the leading sort of fibre experts on the planet. He's written books, he's written papers. He's hugely regarded in the forensic firmament as one of the top men on fibre analysis and how it's used in criminal proceedings. So we will hear from him, and we will hear what his report concluded about all these corresponding fibres that the Chem Centre has found. So that we think will be not next week, but the week after, and then that is really getting to the closing stretch, the final furlongs of the prosecution case, and the last furlong being once again this interview with Mr. Edwards that police conducted in the hours after he was arrested in December 2016, and we will finally get to hear something from the man that we've talked about so much over the last years and months.
That's right, and everyone really is waiting for that. So, Ali, there is light at the end of the fibre tunnel.
That's good, but what about cross-examination? What about cross-examination? That's going to...
Yeah, there'll be a bit... There will be a bit of cross-examination, and Mr. Powell and Mr. Jovich will no doubt trying to point out some holes in these matches that aren't matches.
Yes, I'm sure the word match will be discussed in the cross-examination, and what is a match and what does a match really mean. Thank you both so much for your time this week. That wraps up week 18 of Claremont in Conversation. Enjoy your weekend, stay safe wherever you are, and we'll be back with you Monday for day 75.
This podcast was produced by Kate Ryan and Alicia Preedy and recorded in the studios of Seven West Media. Audio files were provided from the archives of the Seven Network and the West Australian. Sign up for daily emails and all the latest on the Claremont trial at thewest.com.au.
For a fresh take on the news that matters, tune in to WA's newest morning show, The West Live, with Jenna Clark at thewest.com.au. The West Live not only delivers on what the day's big news stories mean for WA with hard-hitting interviews and analysis, but it will also make you smile with light-hearted chats and local gossip. The West Live, like Talkback Radio, but without the interruptions. Listen live weekdays from 8:45 a.m. on thewest.com.au or catch up with the podcast.